Christian privilege, and such a creative way for the Holland Interfaith Allies to begin to have regular get to know your neighbor events. The first being get to know your Muslim neighbor, at which I met Zahabia, who's here today, who's spoken here. And Zahabia and I have been involved now with Grand Haven Interfaith Allies. Another event, which was the second event, you'll never believe this for Holland, but the second Get to Know Your Neighbor event was Get to Know Your Non-Religious Neighbor. Wow, that was the most well-attended. We packed Herrick Library Auditorium, like 200 people, standing room, because they were so curious, you know, that non-believers would be that bold to actually have an event at which they named themselves and sat on a panel and shared their lives. On that panel, there were 5 of us. I'm a secular humanist, so that's how I identify, and I was on the panel. We had 2 atheists who had grown up in Holland Christian schools. They'd gone to Holland Christian grammar school, middle school, high school. One of them came out as atheist to his father a week after he graduated from Holland Christian and thanked his dad for the investment in his education. But he said, I have something to tell you, that all those years have made it clear to me that I am an atheist. And I didn't invite Mom to this breakfast because I know she would cry. So since then, that was like 25 years ago, he shared his story at that panel, along with another born and bred Hollander who's now a philosophy professor at Muskegon Community College, who went to Calvin and then came out to his family. We had an agnostic, and we have one more person. A pure nun. Do you know what nuns are? Not N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S. That's those of us, we've been named by the Pew Center for Research because whenever they're doing a survey about religions, there's a whole bunch of us that check none of the above. So they call us the nuns in their research documents. Well, at this event, we actually had a pure nun, a young woman who was born into a secular family. Now, for those of us who were born into various Christian families, we're just in awe of someone who, right from her birth, was introduced to Carl Sagan. You know, that was sort of the Bible in the home. So she was a powerful presence on that panel. We've also done get to know your Hindu neighbor, get to know your Baha'i neighbor. It was fascinating to get to know those who are adherents of the Baha'i faith. And then we did get to know your mixed up couples. So we had an atheist married to a Protestant Christian, and they both attend Hope Church. Now get that, that was really interesting. And then we had a Muslim married to a Catholic Christian who live in Grand Ledge with a swimming pool in their backyard and are just an amazing couple. The husband was a stand-up comic. He kept us laughing the whole night. So we got to see how couples navigate those interfaith, inter-worldview challenges right within their own home, which was really powerful. So the interfaith movement in Holland is thriving and exploring other worldviews. And then the third positive shift is that Kauffman Institute from Grand Rapids now includes those of us who are secular in their big tent that was sung about this morning. And so those of us who are non-religious are active with Kauffman in their work along the lakeshore. And there was a group that came out of it called the Nuns and the Nuns. There's some great NUNSs in Grand Rapids, the Dominicans, and they're full of life and they're committed to social justice. And so the young student nuns, NONES, fell in love with the Dominican sisters, and they began to create projects together in the area of social justice. So as a result of those positive steps that we noticed in Holland, I met with the progressive ministers who are some of my best friends. They live so purposefully, and I really respect people who live a purposeful life. And I met with each of them individually and told them that we were thinking about organizing as the secular community, and would they have our backs? And they said they would, that they felt it was time, that they were aware of Christian privilege, that they had many people in their congregations who maybe some had come to C3, but it was too far away. So they end up in progressive Christian churches doing good work in the world with their Christian partners. And so we had the backing of the progressive Christian community. We had the backing of Zahabi and Kyle at Kauffman and the interfaith community. And one more thing, the interfaith allies met in a small group in Holland with people who were interested in the topic of religious freedom. And in that circle were many folks who had been harmed deeply by religion, and they had no place to go. And they said, can allies begin to address the experience of religious minorities in the community, as well as those who have no religion at all? And so the progressive pastors said, in compassion, we want Holland Openly Secular Alliance to exist because it provides a place for those in our community who have no place to go, don't feel comfortable in a church. There are many folks like me who are secular humanists or atheists who feel comfortable in the church because they don't believe in any of it, but they enjoy the music, they enjoy the camaraderie, they enjoy the social justice work. There's some of us who we appreciate the church and we partner with our allies in the church, but we were really longing for some other venue within which to meet, like C3, but different. So we traveled around the Midwest and met with organized secular communities. So I traveled to Traverse City, where there's a strong humanist community, traveled to Ann Arbor to the Unitarian Church, and the Unitarians and humanists are at the beginning of humanism's journey from Europe to the United States. The Unitarians were essential in that journey. And I met with them. Then I went to Minnesota and met with the secular humanists there. And we began to craft a beginning plan for Holland Openly Secular Alliance. We launched last year, and we offer two kinds of events. We offer quarterly panels to educate Hollanders about who we are. For example, on April 17th, we had ACLU lawyers, as well as Holly Huber, who was involved in transforming the cross to an anchor here in Grand Haven. We had them sitting on a panel addressing issues having to do with the separation of church and state and how we could be active and what steps we could take as secular folks to be sure that that wall of separation is strengthened as much as possible, and that we call Holland Openly Secular Alliance HOSA, that our HOSA families will have someplace to go when their kids to this day are stoned on playgrounds in Holland schools because they give the wrong answer to the question, what church do you go to? And if you say no church, you are harassed and bullied, which we learned in our inquiry group is not against the law. If non-Christians, gay folks are bullied, there's no recourse. Our kids aren't a protected class from bullying. So we wanted the ACLU lawyers to come and provide for us tools of support so that we are able to know what to do when somebody in HOSA experiences discrimination at their workplace because they don't want to go to the Bible study that's required for employees to go to. There are a variety of ways that Christian privilege expresses itself here in Grand Haven and in Holland and along the lakeshore. And we do have places we can go. There was someone who came up to me at one of these public events at Herrick Library. We have our quarterly events. And so folks see it advertised, Holland Openly Secular Alliance. We're beginning to strengthen our presence. And one of our strategies was to write for the Sentinel. We discovered that there are many folks like us in Holland who live quietly and don't name themselves because of fear of repercussion professionally. We have allies at the Sentinel. So you'll notice if you get the Sentinel that monthly HOSA writes a My Take piece. I wrote the piece Anti-Atheist Bias a couple of weeks ago. Karen Rowland spoke at HOSA last night at our fourth Saturday gathering on Buddhism being a non-theistic choice for those who are secular. And she had a My Take in the Sentinel. So our strategy is to offer these public meetings to support folks to know that we're there. We're living out loud as secular, non-religious people. In fact, best estimates are at least 40% of Holland is non-religious. So we're not that far in the minority, right? There are more of us than we think. And our strategy is to educate the wider public, to normalize the secular worldview through articles in the newspaper so that the Christians who read these recognize that there are those of us who have a different point of view, who experience their proselytizing differently. Anti-atheist bias is a real thing. I was taught from the time I was a little girl that if you did not have a certain kind of relationship with Jesus Christ, that those people were bad, they were evil. I was basically insulated by that bias and prejudice such that when I stepped out of the Christian bubble, when I got enough courage to do that, I found out that the people outside that bubble were really nice. And then I'd been lied to. There'd been no reason, no reasonable basis for what they had taught me. That my experience was very different, and that was one of my steps away from the church, realizing that what I had been told wasn't true, and that there were a lot of good people out there, and I wanted to get to know them. I wanted to hear how they experienced life. I was curious and a free spirit, and when I finally had the courage to step outside of that bubble, I was amazed at the world that was waiting for me. And so reading this, some of the comments have been really interesting as folks have read this, because they're like, well, it's not a bias. It's not a prejudice. You know, it's real. You are going to hell if you're not a Christian, right? So we are having an impact. And the HOSA, I spoke to 90 senior adults in Holland about this. They said, where can we go to meet more humanists and atheists? They were afraid of the word atheist. They raised their hand and said, well, I'm okay with humanist. And so was I at the beginning. I love the word humanist. It's so inclusive. It holds all of us. It's the widest space that we can indwell, is to be called a humanist, because it includes all of humankind. But I'm also an atheist. I don't have a belief in a God, most especially a male God, who has a body and body parts and all of that. That seemed pretty ludicrous to me. If you're going to have a God, why not a spirit, that doesn't have form? And so for us at HOSA, we're operating on several levels. We're providing a meeting space for the secular community, fourth Saturday of every month. We're providing public education to Hollanders through our panels and discussions at the library. And we're normalizing our thoughts, our presence, our worldview by writing in the paper. And we feel like doing all of that means that we are going to be really good ancestors to our children and grandchildren, because we're supporting an infrastructure for the tsunami of nuns that are growing up now. How many of you have children and grandchildren who are nuns, are not in the church? Yeah. That's the way the older generation, not C3ers, you're already enlightened, but for the folks at HASP, they said they came to that event because their grandchildren no longer go to church and don't want anything to do with God. And that concerns them, And when they came to HASP, they wanted to hear from somebody who believes like their kids do, and they wanted to see if they could make any sense of it. And I told them, you need to be good ancestors to your non-religious, non-Christian children and grandchildren by supporting an infrastructure that dismantles Christian privilege so that we can welcome our Muslim neighbors, our Hindu neighbors, maybe your Baha'i grandson or son-in-law, into that big tent that includes all of us. So finally, just a few successes we've had. I'm on lots of committees. I hold up the secular presence on religious committees and interfaith committees. And I'm on the Peace Camp Committee. And the Peace Camp is offered to kids in Holland during the summer. And they study peace, how to make peace, how to keep peace. And this year, HOSA is one of the co-sponsors with the churches. And so by HOSA co-sponsoring, we've had to think through how to promote to a wider audience than they're used to promoting to. So we're having a positive influence on especially the progressive Christian community, inviting them to consider, how big is your tent? Would you receive secular kids into your peace camp? And their answer was yes, because we believe in radical inclusion. And so now we're creating a peace camp that reflects that big tent and that supports all of our children to feeling welcome to Peace Camp this summer, whatever their religious or secular orientation. We're also on Faith Leaders for Justice. We've been asking for that name to be changed. We think Holland Coalition for Justice would reflect a much bigger tent and not serve as a gatekeeper. You know, people say, well, I don't have a faith. I can't be on that committee. I can't be involved in social justice with that group. So we have a voice. We have a strengthened presence, and our voice is being listened to. Oh, and we invited the Holland City Council, Holland School Board, West Olive School Board to our panel with ACLU lawyers discussing issues of separation of church and state. 2 showed up, one on the board of West Olive School Board. He was fantastic. We thanked him for caring enough about the secular experience of citizens in Ottawa County to come and hear our perspective. And we also had a woman who was on Allendale's Sex Education Committee. I didn't know there were such things. And she came because Allendale requires that there's a Christian minister on that committee. Talk about Christian privilege, right? So there has to be a Christian minister on the committee that makes decisions about sex ed in the public schools in Allendale. Go figure. That's an example for the folks who were in the previous discussion of Christian privilege. And she wanted to know how to deal with this, so she came to our panel and she got a lot of good support. So Holland Openly Secular Alliance is alive and well. We're growing. The Christians, the more conservative Christians, are concerned that we're proselytizing. I said, no. Secular people don't proselytize. That's what you do. And that's a projection. They actually invite me to speak now because I'm like so bold. But I said, that's what you do. And it makes sense because you do it. You think everybody does it. You think gay people are trying to proselytize everybody to be gay. You think, you know, women who believe a woman has right to choose what she does with her body are trying to proselytize other women to believe like we do. And you think those of us that aren't Christian are trying to proselytize everybody to become pagans or something. No, that's not. The choice to be secular and non-religious, the choice to move away for many of us from a very closed Christian context took such heart, such mind, such commitment over many years that that's each person's own personal choice if they want to go through that. It isn't easy. Look at the journey of C3 moving as they did metaphorically from Christ Reformed Church to where they are now. It's not an easy journey. So we have no desire to proselytize. We just would like to have a seat at the table because we are a growing demographic. We have so much to offer. And our children and grandchildren deserve our fight. Like, I have 20 years left, so how am I going to use those 20 years? And one of the ways I'm going to use it is to create that infrastructure in Holland along the lakeshore so that our children and grandchildren have an easier time of knowing the truth of what Phil Zuckerman says in his book, Living the Secular Life. And I'm going to read it again in closing, because we begin every HOSA meeting with these words. And those of you who have journeyed that path, I want you to receive it deep inside of you, because our view of ourselves was shaped by what we came from, and we're beginning to have another view. More and more people prefer to live their lives without religion. This does not render us any less normal, natural, American or humane than our religious counterparts. And it does not mean that we lack something essential, meaningful, or purposeful. We lack nothing. Hundreds of millions of secular people experience their secularity in an affirmative, positive, sustaining manner, replete with its own comforts, benefits, and rewards. Amen.